A warm welcome and thank you all so much for joining us here today. My name is Caitlin McCarthy and I'm the Director of the Associates Program at the Environmental Law Institute. Today's event is a collaboration between the Environmental Law Institute, the EJ Committee of ABA, CRSJ, Georgetown University Law Center, and their Environmental Law Society. Thanks also to the DC Bar Association for their support. Our panel today is entitled Environmental Justice in the 21st Century, Threats and Opportunities. We will be continuing the conversation begun in part one that took place last November, which featured Senator Cory Booker of Silecchia and a dynamic panel focused on EJ. Today, we will continue to build upon this dialogue and the emergent need for environmental justice in this country, how EJ can expand through legislation, and what additional threats EJ communities are facing under the current administration. We will conclude the panel with a questions and answer session. During such, my colleague Scott will be around the room with a microphone. Please ask your questions loudly. For our audience members on GoToWebinar, we encourage you to ask a question by submitting it through the GoToQuestions box on the software. Please do not hold your questions till the end. Send them as soon as you think of them. Thank you, and I would now like to turn things over to my colleague Scott.
Hello, I'm Scott Wilson Badnock Jr., visiting attorney at Environmental Law Institute and co-chair of the Environmental Justice Committee of the Section of Civil Rights and Social Justice. We are blessed to have Congressman Representative Raul Ruiz here today to lead our keynote and to introduce our panel. As a point of process, before this brief introduction, it's important to recognize that Representative Ruiz has a house vote at 6:30, so he will be leaving. So if everyone could just stay quiet, and then the panel will be introduced when that transition happens. And Georgetown's own Professor Sheila will be leading this panel. Immediately after the panel, please join us outside in the atrium for a catered reception made possible by the law firm of Holland & Knight. Special thanks to Nicholas Tarr. Representative Raul Ruiz is very much a living, breathing example of the American dream. He was born in Mexico, raised in California, trained to be a doctor and professional at Harvard, attaining 3 graduate degrees there, the first Latino to do so. After Harvard, Ruiz took his expertise abroad as an emergency physician, and then to Coachella Valley, California, where he founded the Coachella Valley Healthcare Initiative. Representative Ruiz's tremendous public service record expanded again when he received a Commander's Award for public service from the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne Division for his humanitarian work after the earthquake in Haiti in 2010. He's even provided emergency medical aid several times to airline passengers. Representative Ruiz has been a congressman for California's 36th congressional district since 2012, winning his 3rd term in 2016 with a stunning 60% of the vote in what used to be a very challenging seat to win for Democrats. As a member of the House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Environment, Representative Ruiz has also taken on the mantle of environmental justice, introducing in October of last year the Environmental Justice Act of 2017, the companion bill to Senator Booker's in the Senate. The bill would be a milestone in the march for environmental justice, finally codifying President Bill Clinton's Executive Order 12898, amending the Clean Air Act to support cumulative impact findings, and overturning several Supreme Court rulings that have limited access to justice for EJ communities. So without further ado, I would appreciate a welcome of Representative Raul Ruiz.
Thank you, Scott, for that introduction. I noticed that when he said I was from the Coachella Valley. Some of you younger folks' eyebrows kind of raised. I know that you were not at the Coachella Festival because I did not see you in the airplane this morning. But maybe you'll go this next weekend, right? Yes, it is the home of the Coachella Festival. I've never been because I work in the emergency department, but it's a lot of fun. And if you get the chance to come down and spend your money in my district, please do so. So thank you all for being here and for taking your time to learn more about the environmental justice movement and how you can all be a part of it. I want to really thank the panelists who are here. I'm so sorry I won't be able to stay. I have to run off and vote, as Scott mentioned earlier, but I'm looking forward to get to know everybody in the future and your organizations. And for those of you who didn't quite catch the bio, my name is Raul Ruiz. I'm an emergency medicine physician. I know I look young. There's some of you who are looking at me like, how old is this guy? So I'm going to tell you what I tell my patients in the emergency department when they look at me and basically say, where's your dad or where's your mom? I tell them, don't worry, ma'am. I'm older than I look. I'm actually 18. And then they say, no, seriously. Where'd you go to medical school? And I say, I went to Harvard. And they say, oh. And then I say, online. So that usually builds some strong confidence there for us. But being here and fighting for the cause of environmental justice is very important for me. You see, I grew up in a farm worker trailer park with farm worker parents, and they did not have a high school education at that time. My mother got her GRE decades later. And we did not have a lot of resources. We did not have a lot of legal resources to turn to if we thought something bad was happening to the environment or our community. We didn't have the know-how or the capacity to even speak up. And ever since I was a young kid, I wanted to be a doctor so I could make a difference in the community, so I can come back and fight for health and social justice, to make sure that we alleviate the health and the healthcare inequities that we see, and to address the social determinants of health and all the disparities in those social determinants of health that affect a person's health and longevity in life. And so for decades, I've been a community organizer since high school, college and medical school, and during my residency, working to enact that social change through community engagement. And now, as an elected official, I realize that my advocacy is not very different. In fact, I'm still an organizer, but the difference is I can work within the system to force a conversation and can help be a voice, another voice, to help hold the megaphone for all of your voices to be heard, and for all of the voices of those communities who for too long have been ignored, so that their voices are heard and that we build their capacity to make decisions, to help make decisions and influence decisions that will affect their and their families' life for generations to come. Before running for office, I served in the emergency department in the front lines of our healthcare, and I saw a lot of the problems that you see in resource-poor settings when people don't have access to the basic tenets of a clean environment. I saw children with asthma coming in, gasping for air when they live in tight quarters with multiple people in a broken down trailer park. I saw and heard stories of elderlies who have lost their electricity and couldn't manage their diabetes medicine in a refrigerator because they went weeks without having power in their broken down trailer park communities, and therefore they went into renal failure and eventually succumbed to problems with their renal failure. So these are matters of life and death in our community. And I saw scared patients, for example, of families that couldn't understand how or why the water they drank were so elevated in chromium or arsenic or selenium, and wanted to know, are we going to be okay? is this something that is going to affect us when they're confused because they don't have any outward symptoms, and they say, but we saw on the news that we're contaminated on the poor side of town in our wells and our systems, but we don't feel any different. Not to, because they didn't really understand that taking over a chronic period of time can lead to their children's lack of developmental growth and cognitive functions. And so far too often these health problems were caused by toxic pollutants in the air they breathe and the water they drink due to poor infrastructure. And I'm talking about trailer parks, for example, where you have above ground septic tanks, and with just a few inches of rain, it does happen in the desert occasionally, that septic tank will overfill, and then you would have the sewage spilled in the dirt area around the trailer parks, where kids would then have to go in and walk through to wait at the bus stop in their neighboring areas. You have mounds of trash from the California Northridge earthquake that was sent to this rural area without anybody's consent, and now it's a big garbage heap that combusts automatically during 120, 125 degree weather. And there's been reports on the internet about this where you see this fumes coming out of this huge garbage area, and that's where the bus stops to drop off the kids who are coming home from school, and they have to walk by there to go into their neighboring farm worker labor camps and trailer parks there as well. And so we've all seen the effects, but I think it is incredibly important to define just what the environmental justice movement is and how it differs from what the larger environmental organizations are fighting for. So there is the conservation movement, and we all agree that the conservation movement is about keeping beautiful, healthy land near healthy communities healthy and protecting the sanctity of that beautiful land. The environmental justice movement is to prevent healthy land becoming unhealthy, and this land is surrounded by already unhealthy communities. So it is that element of social justice, of being able to give a disenfranchised community, whether they are poor or whether they are in rural areas that don't have the means to have a voice, and not allowing the powerful or the large corporations or the government to make decisions without their input that will negatively affect their health and their future. And the environmental justice movement is to give those communities the capacity to participate in our democratic process, which is to have a say in what happens in their own lives, in their own community, for their own health and for their own children. Something that many take for granted these days. And so these are the root causes of environmental injustices, and what we must fight. These decisions without the consultations, decisions that are made that continue to put many communities in inequity in their health and their health care. And this is why it's also important for you and for me, and that's why your voices matter so much. Voices matter so much because the coal miners, for example, in West Virginia, exposed to dangerous chemicals from nearby mountaintop mining, but institutionally marginalized and forced to put themselves and their families at risk to make ends meet. The farm workers who get into pesticide sprayed fields without adequate protection. And the small town next to a chemical manufacturing plant leaking chemicals into the soil that they grow their crops in. Or the tribe who lives downstream from a river that they rely on to grow their crops. And all of a sudden, a big oil pipeline is being built to their only source of water. As we witnessed with the Dapple and the Standing Rock Sioux not too long ago. So they have to live with it. And can you imagine watching your child struggle to draw breath and feeling powerless vulnerable. Many of you have children with asthma. Many of you have asthma. Went to the emergency department. You know that scary feeling like you just, what can I do? What can I do? And the doctors aggressively treat the child, and you're just hoping that albuterol is just going to help, and maybe not at the next one, and hopefully they'll start turning the corner at some point. Can you picture the heartbreak of finding out the dump you live near is putting toxic chemicals into the ground where your children play, and having no way to hold anyone accountable? Not even knowing who to turn to, or having that person say, you know what, this is too big of a problem that you can address, so don't waste your time. So you all in particular know that there is no designated legal way for underserved and vulnerable communities to rectify the health and environmental injustices that they face. There's also not enough federal oversight to stop these injustices from happening in the first place. So this is an outrage. Everyone deserves a safe and healthy environment to live, work, and play. Unfortunately, the polluters and the majority of the lawmakers don't live in the communities that are polluted by their actions and their policies. So for decades, this issue has gone without a real solution. And so I joined Senator Cory Booker to look into the problem, and local groups from my district and around the nation to find that solution. And the Environmental Justice Act will strengthen the protections for vulnerable communities and give voice to the voiceless. It'll be the bite behind the bark. It'll give local communities the ability to sue the federal government if they were not properly consulted prior to decisions and to the damage in the environment. Because ultimately, we achieve environmental justice when everyone has the same degree of protection from environmental and health hazards and has equal access to the decision-making process. So now that this bill is introduced, we all need your help. We need to share our collective wisdom to build support for this bill and this issue. And Scott came to me before my talk and said, we're so looking forward to, knock on wood, the ability to improve on this bill and put a little more teeth on that bite, and to hold corporations accountable, and as well as to empower communities that might not know about your organizations to better able to find the information, the resources they need to fight back and to make sure that they have a say in their lives. This is only the beginning. There's a lot more that we need to do, and we need to start talking about the environmental justice movement within the bigger conservation movement, so that the environmental justice movement becomes the conservation movement. So I appreciate your time, and I'm open for questions.
Do you have the mic here? Oh, there it is. If you have a question, please go up to call it. Anybody? A question for the congressman? Here we go.
Does your eloquent explanation of the justice issue, Congressperson Ruiz, play to one audience, those who care about justice? On the other hand, you're focusing by negation on, well, this isn't bothering a bunch of other people who are very powerful. So how do you balance the appeal of EJ so that people who are not hurt by these environmental injustices will still feel some interest in supporting your bill?
The beautiful thing about the environmental justice movement is that there's also the conservation movement within it. You want to keep your land clean, regardless of where you live or not. And you want to make sure that people are able to enjoy the environment, at least breathe air without going into an asthma attack during difficult environmental circumstances. So I think that the same people, luckily, the same people that are fervently for the conservation movement are also people who have the inclinations to look at the social justice movement in the United States, and so they get it. For the most part, they get it. It's just that, you know, we have to make sure that we continue to remind the larger conservation movement of the importance of the social justice movement within the conservation movement.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I think we have time for one more question before the congressman has to run.
Hello, Congressman. I'm an attorney who does citizen enforcement work under environmental statutes for private citizens and organizations. We do much of our work under fee shifting provisions in various environmental statutes. I know in your legislation there is provisions in there to try to bring in, I believe, some of the fee shifting from, for example, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act and disparate treatment. Is there a reason, or have you considered, I know you gave a private cause of action in your legislation, but there is not fee shifting directly written into your legislation, and I'm wondering if that's something that you would consider doing in the future, because I think that that is a part of your legislation that could really expand upon the communities that could be served by your legislation and the number of attorneys, particularly in private practice, who could then represent those individuals and know that they would be compensated for their time, because there's no other way to do it.
Yeah, I would definitely consider that. Elise is my point on the legislation, so she'll follow up with you, make sure that at some point you guys connect, and we're going to continue to work with Scott and others on this issue as well. Look, you know, there is an affluent area in my district where somebody wanted to put a gas station, and the surrounding neighborhood organized. They had all the tools and the resources, and said, we don't want a gas station. And they went through all the city processes, and they did all the public hearings and everything, and eventually they won. Right? Bad publicity for the gas station owner, etc. Another area further out, my district's pretty big, where people don't even know how to begin the process. They don't know that a process even exists. And so I don't think that, you know, there in some areas of the United States, especially in rural areas, you know, you don't have access to lawyers and your organizations that, like you and yours, that really can go in there and help. We have CRLA in my district, which has been a godsend for a lot of these disenfranchised communities. But understandably, there's a lot of areas where, you know, they don't even know. They don't even have broadband. They don't even have internet to start looking to search. You know, how to get help. So that's part of the, you know, how do we start to educate the community and the nation that these things are wrong. That's why being able to stand up, you know, throughout the nation on national TV, and Cory Booker doing the same, to talk about and educate the people about environmental justice issues is so important, because once you empower them, then they're able to better protect themselves. So thank you. I think I have to leave. There's about five minutes before they call vote. So I
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sarah Colangelo. I'm the Director of the Environmental Law and Policy Program here at Georgetown Law. And it's an honor to welcome you all. I want to start off by recognizing what a great group we have in the room tonight. I look around and I see current students, former students, practitioners, community members, former colleagues from the Justice Department. And I think this really reflects the breadth and diversity of the people who are concerned and impassioned
when we start to talk about environmental justice issues. I also want to thank the Congressman and his staff for giving us their time tonight and lending their voice to this issue. I thought that keynote really painted a striking portrait of the human cost of the inequities when we talk about environmental justice issues, and I want to thank him and his colleagues working on this bill for sharing their thoughts, for empowering communities, and for fighting. It's a fight worth fighting, to be sure. So this program, as Scott mentioned, is a product of a collaboration between many groups here today, the Environmental Law Institute, the ABA, and our student group led by its president, Alyssa, who did a lot of work to bring this to campus on behalf of the students interested in this issue. And collaborating in this way it's always an honor when we're talking about these types of issues. 2 years ago, we welcomed to campus attorneys for clients in the Flint, Michigan water crisis. And they spoke about that litigation, highlighting environmental justice issues. At the end of that event, the line of students wrapped around the stage to meet the attorneys and ask how they could volunteer. These students were asking, could they go on their own dime to Michigan to volunteer to work or work there in the summertime? Our students are incredibly passionate about this issue. So we followed up last year and brought another environmental justice symposium to campus, and we welcomed some of these speakers last year. And that's when Scott and I started to talk about bringing this event here tonight. So we're very happy to bring everyone together finally on this event. And we have our speakers here today who will be introduced momentarily to share their passion and expertise on these issues. And we have our own expert to guide us in that discussion. Professor Sheila Foster is a professor of law and public policy here at Georgetown. She recently joined us from Fordham University, where she was the Albert A. Walsh Professor of Real Estate, Land Use, and Property Law, and she also served as Associate Dean and then Vice Dean. She also co-directed the Fordham Urban Law Center and was a founder of the Fordham University Urban Consortium. Professor Foster writes extensively in the areas of environmental law and justice, urban land use and policy, and state and local government. She currently is the chair of the advisory committee of the Global Parliament of Mayors, a member of the Aspen Institute's Urban Innovation Working Group, an advisory board member of the Marin Institute for Urban Management at NYU, and sits on the New York City panel on climate change. She is also a mentor to students and a great colleague. And I thank her for leading this excellent panel of women tonight. And thank you so much.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming out. We're going to stay seated, I believe. So it's a pleasure to be here, and it was a pleasure to hear the Congressman's passion for this issue and also the pending bill. Someone asked the question about how to broaden interest in environmental justice. So I want to introduce our panel by talking a bit about how rich this area of law and policy is really. So in my book that I wrote with the late Luke Cole, who was the founder of the Center for Race, Poverty, and the Environment, one of the things we did was we traced the history of the environmental justice movement all the way back 50 years to Martin Luther King's sanitation worker strike. Through the modern environmental movement, civil rights movement, workers' rights movement, anti-toxics movement, all of these movements, there's something that the environmental justice movement has pulled and learned from each of these movements. That's very important to understand. The other thing that is important to understand is that unlike all of these robust social movements that many of us have lived through or studied, this is the one that has yet to have a major piece of federal legislation to enshrine the rights and the claims for justice that a grassroots, largely community-based movement has given rise to. There's no Supreme Court decision. There's no federal court decision. For that matter, there's no state court decision. And so one of the things that we have all worked worked on, and many other people, is working across a variety of legal fields: land use, environmental statutes, civil rights statutes. To be an environmental justice lawyer, I've always told my students, is to know a little bit about a lot of different areas: zoning and land use, environmental regulation, civil rights, to really be effective. So it's also not just about the law. So in order to have a robust rights and justice movement, we need laws and we need institutions to enforce them, right? But we also need other kinds of institutions at different levels, not just federal, but state and community. And one of the things that our speakers will talk about tonight is, in the absence of federal legislation, in the absence of robust enforcement at a Department of Justice, at the Environmental Protection Agency, at the Department of Transportation, at the Energy Agency, because environmental justice intersects all these, at HUD, in the absence of enforcement, where do communities get relief from the kinds of things that the congressman talked about? So without further ado, they're all going to cover this and also talk about the different kinds of communities, rural, ethnic, and otherwise, that are engaged in this. So I'm going to introduce each one, starting with Adrienne Hollis to my far right, and through Leslie Fields and Lucia Silecchia. Adrienne Hollis is the Director of Federal Policy at WEACT for Environmental Justice. WEACT is based in Harlem, but she is in the DC office. Adrienne is both a doctor in biomedical sciences and also a lawyer, and has worked a long time in the environmental health field, beginning with her postdoctoral studies at Harvard School of Public Health. She's worked for various agencies as well as Earth Justice, and is really a important both advocate but also epidemiologist and lawyer, all of those things, because we need all of those in thinking through these issues and advocating on these issues. Next up, and I'll just introduce everyone first and then let you speak, is Leslie Fields. Leslie is, first of all, a Georgetown Law grad, but also is working at the Sierra Club on issues of environmental justice. But she was appointed as well by President Obama on the board of directors of the Mickey Leland Urban Air Toxics Research Center. She served on the board of the Children's Environmental Health Network, and also on the board of the Adesso African Solutions. I mentioned that last part because Leslie's work is international in scope, and she's worked a lot in tying these issues across borders. She's also an adjunct professor at Howard. Last, but certainly not least, we'll hear from Lucia Silecchia, who's a professor of law at the Catholic University of America. And she has a tremendous background on these issues as they intersect with Catholicism in particular, and communities of faith. Since December 2016, she has been an expert to the Permanent Observer Mission of the Holy See to the UN. And also she has visited in Rome and worked across the world on issues with regard to justice and peace from a faith perspective. And we'll talk about kind of the expansion of environmental justice issues across what are traditionally EJ communities, which are poor ethnic minority communities. So without further ado, I will turn over to Adrienne.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here tonight, and thank our sponsors. I know we've already heard who they are, so I won't list them. This is a very important topic, more so now than ever. I never thought that I would have never thought there would be a time when it was more important. But as we continually lose our environmental protections in this administration, it has been a focus for the communities that I work with. So quickly, a little background, because it's applicable in this situation. One of the activities of the DC office of WEACT for Environmental Justice is to facilitate the Environmental Justice Leadership Forum on climate change. And it's about 42 environmental justice organizations across the country. And we're always looking for more. And it's a variety of people, both some are rural, some are, we have our Indigenous brothers and sisters who are members. We have people from as far away as Alaska Alaska, and as close as Virginia. I guess we haven't been able to find anyone in Maryland yet, but where I live. So we do. So this organization originally started, or this forum originally started to address climate change through the Clean Power Plan, and we know where that has been headed lately. So one of the topic is very timely: threats and opportunities. One of the threats that I wanted to quickly identify is just in inclusion, or the lack of inclusion. And I want to, I know now that the representative congressman has gone, but I recall initially when the bill was presented to communities, there was a big uproar because a lot of EJ communities felt like they hadn't been included in initial discussions around the modeling for that bill. And that's something that I just had a conversation about a different bill that is supposed to be released from a different senator soon on environmental justice. And because that's the #1 law, is that communities have to be represented, right? Have to speak up and be included, because you really can't design anything for communities without community input. It just doesn't make sense. And so I know that Senator Booker's staffers held a lot of I guess conference calls with community organizations across the country. Some people were concerned because in codifying Executive Order 12898, you're bringing it to the attention of this administration. And that is not something that you really want to do, given his record, or given the record of rollbacks and I don't know, redactions and whatever else you want to call it. And so that was a concern. And on the other hand, just as was pointed out by Dr. Foster, there aren't any real environmental protections that are supported. I mean, any true environmental protections that are environmental justice protections that are protected. So codifying it makes sense on one hand, but is now the time. And so that's a threat, timing, and, you know, for different, you know, the important part is that communities get to express themselves and express their concerns around that issue. And that's something that's been going on. One of the opportunities is working with non-traditional partners. And in that, we're facing the same threat: involvement and inclusion early on in the process, because that hasn't always occurred. And so when we find out about an issue, you have to go back and say, wait, you haven't included environmental justice, which then you have to stop what you're doing, go back and address this issue to continue the fight that you're engaged in a different area. So, you know, that in and of itself is a threat, because you lose, your attention has now been diverted from a particular fight that you're engaged in. So, and of course, the main threat I think you'll hear from a lot of communities is lack of funds, because environmental justice communities traditionally do not get funds from funding agencies or individual donors. They give money to what we call the big greens, you know, organizations that, for the most part, some of which do environmental justice, and I know Leslie's going to talk about Sierra Club and her work there, and we work together. But some of them may not be known as environmental justice organizations, but that's where the funding goes. And then we can't get the money that we need as organizations, EJ organizations, to do the work that needs to be done. I wanted to also talk about the fact that, you know, this administration, at least EPA, has been talking about, maybe you've heard the term collateral federalism, which we know is all about moving, diverting environmental enforcement to the state. And that is an issue because all states don't enforce environmental regulations. I mean, it's just not done in some parts. I'm from Alabama, and growing up, that was a big issue, right? You know, I grew up in the shadow of the paper mill, and you know, we could smell it, and we were told that's how money smells and things of that nature. So a lot of industries back in my day used to move to the South because there were, you know, things were more lax and fines were generally lighter. So you know, that is still an issue. Just, you know, just protection, the protection that's afforded to communities. So in this, one of my main passions, I guess, is to make sure that communities have all of the tools in their arsenal that they need and can pull from to be able to address environmental degradation, environmental pollution, environmental contamination, or any threat at the state and local levels. And, so we believe, like, one of the things we're doing is working with EPA to provide training on how to comment on Clean Air Act permit applications, something that communities traditionally don't do because they feel like they're not experts, some communities. But there are certain things that everybody can look for. And so, we're in the process of working with, our EPA partners to provide this training to not only our forum members, but also any community organizations, any community members that want that. And we're still planning that process. We're providing training at we usually have, we always have a once a year in-person meeting. This year's going to be in Richmond for a number of reasons, mainly because the communities there are facing the threat of the Atlantic coast and the Mountain Valley pipelines, right? And the fact that their property that they've had that can trace back to slavery has been taken away through eminent domain after the area has been rezoned from residential to industrial to allow the pipeline, which does not benefit them in any way, to come through their community. And a lot of them are now in the blast zone in case there's a leak or an explosion, right? And they were told, well, you'll be okay if you can get out. So, which doesn't make sense when it comes to communities. So there are a lot of threats, and then there are a lot of opportunities. I sit on the board of the Endangered Species Coalition, an organization I would normally never think of working with. But of course, when we talk about pollution and the conservation movement and things of that nature, we're all suffering. We're all going to be suffering from climate change issues, and we're all suffering from environmental degradation because pollution doesn't know to stop at the railroad tracks or the fence line or this community or that district, right? It goes everywhere. And so that's, one of the opportunities that we have is that I receive a lot of phone calls from non-traditional partners who are like, what can we do to work with you? And a lot of communities are saying, we need funding. You can't come in and just do things to us. You have to do things with us, or let us tell you what's important and what the issues are, what we've identified, because citizen science is another challenge, but it's also another opportunity to allow what historically is been known by the community to be a part of the story of environmental justice or environmental injustice. So, those are some of the things we're working on. I put some things outside, a booklet that we've put together. It's called Cleaner Air, Cleaner Communities. And what it is a 6-step process that describes how state and local and federal governments should work with communities. Should get involved, get communities involved early and often at the beginning of the process, and identify what the potential threats are, right? And who the impacted community will be, or if there's an impact from any new legislation, or if there's one from any existing or proposed legislation, so that communities can say, well, this is what we know to be true, because that's what normally occurs. Now, I haven't seen the sign being held up, so I hope I'm not talking. Okay, 5 minutes. Thank you. I usually don't talk this long, so. But this booklet was originally designed to work with the Clean Power Plan. But what we realized was how impactful it is to all issues that states are engaged in. And I should say that states are required to prepare an implementation plan for some federal, well, originally a good example would be the Clean Power Plan. How do you plan to implement the activities that are required under the Clean Power Plan, which, as we know, is no longer, but that's for any federal action. So when it comes to designing the state implementation plan, you can't implement anything if you don't have buy-in from the community. And I don't know why. I feel this. I've been doing this work off and on for like 20-something years. I started out as a child, very young, infant really. So, and some things haven't changed. And one of those things being the need to keep repeating that you can't get anything done without getting input, buy-in, agreement from the people who are going to be most affected, who are already most affected. And so that's sort of like, that is my passion, and that is most of the work that I do in the DC office of WEAC, in addition to supporting the work of our New York office. So, and I probably forgot a lot, so hopefully you'll ask me questions to trigger my youthful memory.
Leslie Field.
Good evening. I'm thrilled to be here at my alma mater, and I want to kind of direct my comments to the students, and I really appreciate you all being here. And thank you, Dr. Hollis. Dr. Hollis, I get the pleasure of working with her. We have officed with them, and so it has helped us a lot, and it has been a great collaboration. I highly recommend it. And I'm at the Sierra Club, which is right down the block, and I get to come over here to go to the gym, which did not exist when I was here. I'm not bitter, but now I'm taking advantage of it. And so I'm the director of the Environmental Justice and Community Partnerships Program. The Sierra Club, as you all probably know, is the big, old, large, hoary green group. And we were founded in 1892 when John Muir took Teddy Roosevelt out to the woods, which became Yosemite National Park. But in order to create that national park, something had to happen, which was you had to kick the people out who were living in the park. So guess who was living in the park at the time? Any guesses? Yes, right. And that's part of the whole World Parks movement. You cannot live in a national park. So there's all kinds of land rights cases all over the world. Communities who were kicked out of parks, became parks, and are now suing to get their land back. So the indigenous people there were kicked out, and that started the Sierra Club, and we have 63 chapters all over the country. So we are a microcosm of our society. All right, we have white supremacist roots. We have people who really just they join the Sierra Club to be outside and bird and hug the trees and all that good stuff, which we all love to do too. So 100 years, then 100 years later, we were, the Sierra Club started getting involved with some chapters in the South, started working with communities, all kinds of problems. And they actually requested the Sierra Club put organizers in the community. So we had organizers in about 9 communities around the country. I've been there 10 years, but I've been involved with the Sierra Club since around 1992 when I lived in Texas. And hi, Bernice. And and that's our good colleague, Bernice Miller-Travis. And so I was actually doing environmental justice here when I was a student, but we didn't call it environmental justice. I was working at the Migrant Legal Action Program as my little job, and working on toxics issues and farm worker issues, the Eastern Shore, and then later supporting communities around the country. And so that got my introduction. And what I want to say to the students is that in order to be a good EJ lawyer, you have to be a good environmental lawyer, and you have to be excellent in learning about the other subject matters like civil rights and every human rights as well. These are human rights issues, and we get caught up in the civil rights frame, but they're really also human rights issues. And some countries already recognize that there is rights of nature, there is a right to life, there is a right to health in their constitutions, and we have a right to pursue happiness. Okay, whatever that means. What that means for a lot of people is a rapacious, consumeristic, kind of, we have a capitalist culture, which we all benefit from, myself included. So, but we have been working at the Sierra Club to make sure that environmental justice is centralized in what we do. And it's been a struggle because it's a majority white, wealthy organization. And we have a lot of chapters that, like I said, that's not why they joined. So we've been struggling with that, and we've had a lot of great successes, and we've still had a lot of struggles. And there's a lot of opportunities in environmental justice. And what I love about it, because it's become a calling for me, is that I get to be with the best people. I'm here with you all. I have wonderful colleagues, and we are really, it's really making a way when there's been no way. It's really making it up. And if you like to make up law, if you like to make up and take situations which seem intractable and create opportunities, this is a great venue for you. But no matter what you do and who you work for, because I think conscious people, like-minded people need to be everywhere, that you're going to have to work really, really hard. You're going to have to work a lot of weekends. You're going to have to work, put a lot of time into it. I just got back from New Orleans Saturday night, and I was pretty down because we're still working on a lot of the same intractable issues in New Orleans and in Louisiana. And we are working on, one issue is the Bayou Bridge pipeline, which is going from Calcasieu Parish, which is West Louisiana, all the way across the Atchafalaya Swamp to St. James Parish, which is on the Mississippi River. St. James Parish is one of the parishes in Cancer Alley, which you probably hope have heard about. From Baton Rouge to New Orleans, on the Mississippi River, there's about 50 petrochemical refineries and plants in the heart of the African American community there, the descendants of the people who were formerly enslaved. They didn't go anywhere, they had nowhere to go. So these facilities have been sited there, and we've been working with communities for a very, very, very long time on this. And what's interesting about this pipeline is, to get to that gentleman who asked us about how to get other kinds of people involved, is that this pipeline will destroy a way of life. That's how you get people involved. All right, so the Cajun crawfish oystermen's way of life is being destroyed. The people who, Louisiana is the fisherman's paradise. They're losing a football field of land a day because of the subsidence, because of the oil and gas industry channeling through. And that's how people have gotten involved. These hearings have been packed. They booed former Senator Mary Landrieu, who now, is shilling for the oil companies, off the stage. And their children, when we drove out there last year during the flooding, I-10 was closed. We had to go through the back roads. It was pitch black. The power was out. I thought I was back in Nigeria. We couldn't see anything. And when the sun came up and we were outside Mossville, we went by a cemetery, and I saw coffins coming out of the cemetery. All right. If I ever saw my grandmother's coffin come out of the cemetery, I would need some therapy. This is what people are facing. So yes, they are involved, they are engaged, and they know that their children and their heritage, this is our heritage, this natural environment is our heritage. The natural systems are being destroyed. And climate change is the threat multiplier, and it exacerbates all existing inequalities. So if you're already sited where there's all kinds of pollution, there's all kinds of facilities, there's cumulative impacts, guess what? After Hurricane Harvey, all that pollution went everywhere, over to Montrose, to the rich folks, over to Rice University, okay? You can't get away from it. Even though the people in Manchester who are practically living next to tanks on the Houston Ship Channel, of course, got it worst, all right? But everybody's going to get it. And Martin Luther King Jr. said, we all came in different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. And so there's a global movement. All these communities that we talk about, one of the things that I think is very important is, Adrienne has emphasized, because I'm a Star Trek-y person, and I believe in the Prime Directive. The Prime Directive for Environmental Justice in my book is communities speak for themselves. So this is a real tension, because you have statutes that really don't address that. And if you talk about, okay, we're going to use the mercury toxics rule, we're going to file a lawsuit, and we got to make sure that, because this area is in Puerto Rico, which we're doing a lot of work in, is a non-attainment, we have to make sure that community, by that plant who actually fought for this a long time ago, is still included. But we can't find everybody. Why? Because they've been displaced. Right? We've seen this time and time again. And so it's really, really difficult. So again, use non-traditional allies, and I know she's going to talk about faith community, because we've been, lots of folks have been working with churches, faith communities, the schools. I mean, all these people, the health community. I mean, to say it like that sounds really general, but it really is very, very important. And there's still a lot of discriminatory behavior with the mainstream environmental groups, and there's very much discriminatory behavior with the funders. And I spend a lot of time fundraising, and I spend a lot of time on this issue because it's kind of the final frontier. It's a real problem, and I'm happy to talk more offline about it because I could talk about this a long time. Because we are not going to make it. We're not going to make it as a society if we leave anybody behind. And we need everybody's intellect. We have such intractable problems now. We need everybody's good thinking. When I used to do contested case hearings in Texas, we'd have Mrs. Brown come up, and the other side would say, Mrs. Brown, are you a toxicologist, epidemiologist, hydrologist? What do you know about the situation? Well, I lived in the community for 50 years. When I was a girl, the creek ran clear and we had crayfish. 50 years, then came the plant, then came the sickness, then came the asthma, then came the dump. So yes, that person's an expert too, and we need to respect these indigenous knowledges, allow this work to become very professionalized. And it's important because this is my alma mater and this is a great school that we get this education because it takes you very far, but also to respect that indigenous knowledge from people, because we're not going to win unless everybody's included. And I'm very concerned about this because more and more people are being excluded because of the professionalism, but also because it's so difficult. It's gotten so technical, and it is a problem because we can't get all the information. We have to make it easier for folks, and that's what Adrienne and WEAC have been doing, and many, many other groups. And also, there's lots of ways to do that and to keep people involved, and you can have fun with this work. It is joyous work. All right, we work in Puerto Rico with our most excellent chapter. We work on festivals we have festivals all the time. We are always trying to party. All right, it's very important to have fun with this work and to go to, like I said, came back from New Orleans. I'm never like, oh darn, I have to go to New Orleans. You know, there was French Quarter Fest. I just missed Jazz Fest, right? And so we used to have the National Black Environmental Justice Network, and we would have our meetings, and then we would go to Essence Fest. Okay, it was really great. So you bring in people's cultures. People will want, you're helping support their culture, then you can include all of that. Their religious aspects, their cultures in terms of ancestor worship, whatever it is. Extremely important to bring this in. And you bring it in, because you use the Antiquities Act. You use the Endangered Species Act. We use NEPA. We have to use everything. We have to throw everything in the tackle box out there when we go out there and try to throw it out there and see what we get. The venue shopping, everything. And we have partnered with, all kinds of folks. When we were trying to stop the airport in Houston many years ago, I went to, there was the lake, my boss sent me out to go to Lake Livingston, and he said, I want you to go meet with the Black Bass Fishermen Association. And I spent the whole time driving out there thinking, is it the fish black or the fishermen are black? And I got there and it turned out the fish were black. But since I'd grown up hunting fishing with my grandparents, it was fine. And we worked with them and the skeet shooters, and we went in with them to then Mayor Brown's office, and he saw this coalition of people who he didn't expect to see moving all together. And we helped stop the third highway to go around Houston, which would have destroyed the Katy Prairie, and part of that has been destroyed, and you saw the flooding that's gone through with Hurricane Harvey. Because that natural, like I said, that natural wetland, those are being destroyed. That is a natural line of defense. We cannot levy our way out of this problem. And so there's lots of ways to get at this, and there's lots of opportunities. Things have gotten much, much better because of private-public partnerships. Here in DC, we had a terrible, some of you are younger, you don't remember, we had 3 coal plants here because of the community in River Terrace. They got that coal plant shut down. They put a coal plant, they put a school right next to a coal plant. And then there was the Morant plant in Alexandria, and we showed through the modeling that plume came right across the river and sat right over Ward 8. And that's why that community had the largest incidence of asthma in the region. And so through the Cross-State Air Pollution Room, we got then Mayor Gray. I tracked him down at the Channel Inn Club that one night, and which no longer exists, and talked to him about this. And he said, come to our office, and we got his letter to send to then Governor McAuliffe, the cease and desist, and that helped get that, we had that model and we have the technology down. So, and now with, there's lots of opportunities in terms of renewable energy, and the communities that are really, really interested. After Katrina, we worked with a lot of communities in the lower Ninth Ward, helped develop the Center for Sustainable Engagement Development, and the Make It Right Foundation. Brad Crick came in, and the communities had 1 million meetings, went to meetings, and they wanted to build back better. And now there's 100 solar homes in a neighborhood that's 100% African American. It's the most solar intensive neighborhood in the United States, residential in the United States, and it's 100% African American. The problem is these communities they're still dealing with the legacy issues, and now they've got to stretch out to the renewable energy at the same time. And we have to support them because we cannot leave those legacy issues because those kids don't get a chance. And it's really unfair when we had a lead and water crisis here when we had our control board, all right? And we had a lead crisis here. There's schools that still don't have water fountains because they close the water fountains and the kids drink pop all day, all right? And now, like corn syrup, we have what's called, we still have neighborhoods here that some people say deserts, food deserts. I say it's just food apartheid. Let's just call it for what it is. All right, desert implies some naturally occurring condition. This is intentional discrimination. It was intentional that we cannot get groceries. There's 2 grocery stores up in Ward 8. All right, it's not an accident. It's not an osmosis. It's not a natural causing thing. And so all these things that happen, and you have schools. Last year we had a case in New Orleans where they were putting a school yet another dump, and we did a campaign where we got a kid in a hazmat outfit, and our campaign said, this will be your child's new school uniform if your child goes to the school. They'll have to wear hazmat. So our kids get poisoned, then they present with bad behaviors, they get in detention, and then they're into the school and prison pipeline. Do not pass go. This is what's happening. They don't have a chance. I've seen schools next to lead smelters. I've seen them next to polyvinyl chloride plants. I've seen them next to refineries, and it still keeps happening. And this is an outrage. And this is something that really needs to, just as we see foaming at the mouth in Florida, like by Edith Okeechobee, at a Rosenwald school, the Black parents got a brand new school, but it's next to the sugarcane field, and when they process the sugarcane, they still burn it. Okay, it's like slavery by another name down there. And the rats and the snakes are running out on the kids in the playground and in the community. And you don't have to burn cane anymore, because in Australia and Brazil, they have machines for it. And the big sugar's there in the plant, and that's where the community works. And so, but these kids miss school and they fall behind. And so, we have lots of ways to get involved with EJ. You don't have to be, that's what I love about it. You can be a community person, you can be a grandmama, you can be a lawyer, you can be overachiever, PhD, JD person. There's lots of ways to get involved in environmental justice, and it's very, very rewarding. I'll stop because I think my time's up. But thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Lucia,
good evening. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm from 2 metro stops north, and it's wonderful to be here. I'm grateful to the organizers for picking such a great topic, and also for letting me speak last, because now I can kind of build on some of the things that my colleagues have said. But as it was mentioned, most of my research has been on the ways in which religious communities address environmental ethics questions. And in particular, I've studied the Catholic tradition because that is my own. But I think it's also important to look at environmental justice questions from a faith perspective for two reasons. First, that is for many people a very important component of their lives. And so whether somebody is a person of faith or lives in a community where people who lead a local congregation are important leaders in the community, for many people, that's a very important influence on their lives. But also it helps cast these issues in an ethical perspective. And I think one of the questions, how do we get people who are not directly affected interested? Somebody might not be interested in it as a legal question, a political question, economic question. But I think one of the things that faith traditions have done has been to say, this is an ethical question too. And regardless of what the limitations might be on what the law could do, on what federal governments can do, state governments can do, what economic actors might do, each of us individually as ethical actors can take a look at these problems, see a role for ourselves, and also see the connections between this question and so many others. Certainly the connection between religious thinkers and environmental justice got a lot of publicity now coming on 3 years ago when Pope Francis issued an encyclical Laudato Si, which, depending on which version you have, is 120 pages of discussion of environmental issues. People called it the environmental encyclical, but actually, if you read it through, the theme is everything is connected: economics, politics, social questions, personal questions, ethical questions as well. And so I think that's a theme certainly that we see throughout this. I am a native New Yorker, and one of the things that my students tell me is I speak way too fast. So I'm going to try not to do that. So I have a few notes for myself on some points that I'd like to raise, but I also want to make sure that I end with enough time to ask your questions. But I think one of the things that religious perspectives bring to this question is it helps bridge a gap that the environmental justice community has seen for a long time, which is a perceived divide between people who care about the environment and people who care about people. And I think so often there has been this view that those two are opposed to each other. And there's a beautiful quote from Pope Benedict, who said, "Humanity, if it truly desires peace, must be increasingly conscious of the links between respect for nature and human ecology. Experience shows that disregard for the environment always harms human coexistence. It becomes more and more evident that there is an inseparable link between peace with creation and peace among each other." And I think that is something that the environmental justice movement has noticed for a long time, that severing peace with creation and peace with each other is dangerous. What might this mean in practical terms? And I'd like to start with a theme that I think has been raised before, which is this need for broad participation and consultation. And in the past, there's been so often that critique that the environmental movement is a movement of the wealthy who see environment and conservation as a luxury. And I think we recognize now more and more that it's not a luxury, that it's a necessity. I also teach theory of human rights, and the connection between environmental degradation and other important human rights, I think, is important as well. And Pope Francis said we need a conversation which includes everybody. And I think all too often there has been discussions about people and not with people. And from a religious perspective, focusing on the dignity of the person, I think there's a perspective that not only is that wrong politically, not only is it wrong practically, not only is it wrong that you're not going to get the right solutions for problems, but that it's an affront to the dignity of the people whose lives are being discussed if they are not fully involved in the conversation. And I think that's something important that religious communities bring. I think it also suggests that if we're going to take a look at this issue from a holistic, ethical way, discussions of environmental justice are connected to discussions of so many other things. So you can't look ethically at environmental justice questions without looking at access to housing. Why do people live where they live? Why do they have some options available and not other options? What is the housing situation like? Because if if we start taking a look at the ethics of what is basic decent housing, that's so closely connected to some of these environmental questions. We also have to take a look at jobs and labor. What are the consequences of regulation on jobs, and what are the consequences of non-regulation? Who is working jobs that are going to be affected, and how do we make sure that what action and inaction, whatever impact that has on the dignity of employment, is looked at in an ethical way? It's also important to take a look at our consumption patterns, and I think in some ways this is where kind of the personal impact of environmental justice hits home, I think, for each one of us. But why do we have the need for so many waste sites? Some of it certainly is industrial, and some of it is chemical. Some of it is consumer waste as well, that we are urged through many religious perspectives to take a look at the simplicity of life and whether or not we need the things we want and want things that maybe we don't need. And Pope John Paul said, "It's manifestly unjust that a privileged few should continue to accumulate excess goods, squandering available resources, while masses of people are living in conditions of misery at the lowest level of subsistence." And I think it's a call to look as individuals at how we might contribute to the need to have waste sites and dumps in various communities. It's also impossible, I think, to look at environmental justice questions without looking at questions of urban design and the very depressing sometimes interior and exterior designs that we have in our cities, and homes that we perhaps would not voluntarily choose to live in dart our landscapes everywhere. Sometimes you look at schools that have no windows and cement yards, and you think that is where people grow up. And that's a part of the environment as well. It's the human constructed environment and what role that might play in environmental justice. And one of the groups of people who actually seemed most interested in Pope Francis's encyclical were friends of mine who are architects, because it said a lot about how the constructed human environment impacts our relations with each other and with the wider community. I think it's also important to take a look at access to nature and how we let people or introduce people to the beauty of nature that I take for granted, that I can take a walk in Rock Creek Park, that I could go on a family vacation to some of these beautiful wonders of the country, and how much we look at those as luxuries and don't realize how we can introduce people, particularly kids, to that beauty of creation and of nature. And I think that's a message that faith communities are trying to bring home. I think it's also important in particular to look at the generations that come after us. And one of the messages from faith communities, but certainly not them alone, is this idea of intergenerational responsibility. And I think some of the previous speakers have spoken about the difficulties of intragenerational equity, how you get everybody alive now at the table when you're making decisions. I like to suggest that's compounded by the fact that we also have to figure out a way to make sure that future generations are fairly represented, so that we're not thinking just in the short term, but what will our children's children think about decisions that we make. And it's certainly not a monopoly that religious communities have on thinking about kind of eternity, but it's looking at the future and saying, how do we make sure in a system that has a difficult time making sure that people currently alive are at the table, but how do we account for the obligations that we bear to future generations and what we pass on to them. One of the other things that I think is important to be careful of is making sure the decisions that we make that affect environmental justice domestically don't have the unintended consequence of creating unjust conditions in foreign countries. And that's a difficult thing to control for, but how do you work with industry, corporations, business leaders to make sure that efforts to achieve justice here doesn't result in businesses just relocating to poorer communities in other countries, but what is that global sense of responsibility and environmental justice there as well. And I think maybe because I'm a teacher, I also think it's difficult looking at environmental justice questions without looking at education. And certainly I agree with the observation that so much of this has become professionalized. And I would say not only professionalized, but legalized. That, if you're not a lawyer and you are an advocate, I think that puts you at a disadvantage in many circumstances. And so what are we thinking about the ethics of the right to a good quality education and how important that might be? So certainly education in law and public policy, but also what are the opportunities for education in environmental sciences, in engineering, in technology, in communication, in journalism, all of those ways in which people who have a good education, who come from communities that might bear some of the brunt of environmental injustice, can be their own advocates. So there's not a reliance on who from the outside with a good education comes in, but what opportunities do we allow people to advocate for themselves? And so certainly none of these are the sole province of religious groups and advocates, but I think one of the contributions of religious organizations has been to say, certainly the law is important, but let's step back for a minute and take a look at this as a broad ethical question and ask, what does this mean about the way we view the Creator, the creation, and what our obligations are to each other both now and in the future? And so I welcome your questions and discussions, but it's a great topic, and I'm glad to be part of the conversation.
Thank you. So thank you for a rich set of comments. As I said, environmental justice is an incredibly rich area, not just legally, but across the board. Let me invite questions from the audience or comments on anything that you've heard or that you didn't hear and have a question about.
Okay.
Okay, go for it. Go for it.
We're great for you guys. I'm
Yeah.
Robin Lewis. I work as an environmental justice advocate, community organizer in Georgetown County and Baltimore City. And I just started working on a campaign about fluoride in the water. And I heard a few of you say things about that, but I'm just wondering your perspective on looking at not just what is in the water, lead, asbestos, and the other things, but what is put into the water without the permission of the community. Just wanted to know your perspective.
So water issues in particular, I mean, and not just, I take it, chemicals in the water or toxins, is that the distinction you're trying to make, but even kind of naturally occurring?
Well, not just natural.
Well, I
I'm
mean,
talking about not
yes,
natural.
not natural, I'm sorry.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, but that aren't,
interested in
but that aren't
Sierra
regulated.
Club. I
Yeah.
don't know the Sierra Club perspective of
Yeah.
part of Sierra Club, I don't know, but
I had-
react on
Yeah.
how you guys feel about that whole campaign against putting fluoride in the water.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks for coming. I remember a few years ago, this was a very big topic. And I know we do have some, I can talk to you offline, we have some chapters. I remember San Antonio, I think is one of the largest cities that gets their water straight out of the aquifer. All right, and anybody's here from San Antonio. And so there was a fight many years ago about this. So that's why it's so important to protect aquifers and all of that and get the recharge. But, I can look that up for you. I don't think it's been an issue for a while, but I know folks in San Antonio were dealing with this for a while back, and I think they fought it back.
Well, it's happening.
Yeah, I believe you. Yeah, I'm just saying.
Okay.
I'm not clear. It's been a while since the Sierra Club has addressed this.
We can talk about it.
Yeah, offline.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great, I think we have one question from the web, and then we'll move back to the room. And I'd like to take this chance to remind everyone on GoToWebinar that you can submit your questions on the GoTo box. So the question from the web is, EJ is usually thought of in terms of waste or environmental degradation being imposed on a disenfranchised community. Would you consider the reverse issues involved in gentrification of neighborhoods to be a part of EJ? The land trust movement began as a response to post-Civil War threats to sharecroppers.
Now it appears in response to revitalized urban cores pushing long-term, often disenfranchised residents out.
Yes. The short answer is yes. I don't think you might get disagreement, but I mean, gentrification is a big issue. You know, we can just look around DC and see, you know, when I'm riding with Bernice, she's pointing out historic areas in and around DC and Maryland. And I'm like, but where do the people go? And she's like, nobody knows. You know, when an area becomes the what is it, 8th Street corridor, because I'm not from here, as I said, you know, the issue was, where do the people go who used to live here, but now that it's been improved, they can't live here. So where do they go? Right? So yeah, it's an environmental justice issue for sure, from my perspective.
Yeah, most definitely. I'm on board of a great group called Empower DC here in DC. And we work on this issue. Much of it is about, we've lost public housing, all right? Again, with I attribute that to our control board accelerating that. Lost DC General, you know, public, hospital. And so one of the things I encourage you to look at the website and donate and come to our events and all that good stuff. But we are working with the folks in Berry Farms and in other places in Southwest right now. They're putting the soccer stadium in, all right? And that is going to displace a huge community of people in Carrollton, at Greenleaf, that whole area. That traffic that's going to come in, they have to widen the bridge. They're going to have to put parking in. There's already a cement factory there. And so it's construction is deeply impacting people. So I doubt very much they're going to want to enjoy playing soccer. Now, they play soccer, as many of you know, in RFK. RFK already had all that infrastructure there. They already had a metro stop there. They already have parking there. It's right off of 295. But people in this, you know, leadership in this town are holding out the hope against hope that Washington football team that's over in FedEx Field is going to come back to DC. So they're holding the stadium for that. I can't say their name because can't say their name. So you know what I'm talking about. So I mean, these are decisions that are being made, and yes, it's a huge problem. The people here who stayed the course during the dark days, when our city was getting ravaged, we had a drug problem. We had people just getting rounded up, and they held on to their houses and they paid their taxes. Now they're getting older and they need relief, and they should get that relief now that it's all magically delicious.
Right, and I think it's important to kind of connect that environmental justice is not just about keeping bad things out of neighborhoods, but also it's about amenities. So the link here to gentrification is that, fine, you don't live in these poor neighborhoods with failing houses, but you're not getting the good neighborhoods either. The ones that are being revitalized and that are bringing amenities. And so community land trusts are a way, which come out of the environmental movement, the conservation movement. Land trusts are a way to preserve and to keep people in the communities as they're growing around them and bringing in amenities. So I do think in that sense, it's an environmental justice issue, and it's something that we don't connect the dots around enough.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for that talk. I really enjoyed hearing all of your perspectives. Since we're here at Georgetown, I'm Daniel Sotolino, I'm with the Nature Conservancy. Since we're here at Georgetown, I thought I'd reference a book I read a long time ago by a Georgetown University law professor named Lisa Heinzerling called Priceless. And I wanted to get your perspectives on when in the legal environment do you find it effective to take the cost-benefit analysis approach of, let's say, Cass Sunstein, versus where, if at all, you've been able to find some legal traction on what some might say is a more ethical argument, not more ethical in the sense that it's better or worse, but it's more of an ethical argument than an economic argument that Heinzerling made in Priceless.
I'm happy to take that. Someone else. Well, you too? Okay. So So that has a couple parts. So Lisa Heinzeling's book about priceless is really about the kind of losing game of trying to quantify things that are basically non-quantifiable. And so health is one of those, one might say. And your question really is there any purchase ever in playing this game, right? For people that are vulnerable populations that are never going to win it. And so, you know, when I taught environmental justice at Georgetown a couple years ago, one of the things I did was I showed Lisa Jackson, Lisa, the head of the EPA, I'm sorry. Yes, Lisa Jackson. Okay, I'm glad I got her rulemaking around, I think it was the ozone rule, played this game, right? And she played it very well. And basically what it was that she tried to calculate the cost to vulnerable populations of increased ozone and why the rule, which would tighten the standards, right, would win this cost benefit game. And on the face of it, it was well done. At the end of the day, I think it was stopped in its tracks. It was, well, this is my point, Bernice, thank you. But this is my point, is that there is no purchase in playing the game, even if you can play it well, right? Because I think that one of the things with regard to regulation and rulemaking is that environmental laws are written to maximize aggregate social welfare. They're agnostic about who pays the cost for the fact that we all get better air. But if the cost of it is that some people are sacrifice zones, really our environmental laws have nothing to say about that. And this is the point. Cost benefit analysis is really designed to serve aggregate social welfare. So the idea of attainment and non-attainment zones, we can be in a regional area with great air quality, but yet the poor African American, Latino, or rural areas can be paying that price. And so this is why, until we have a set of norms and laws that address that, environmental justice will be really what all of our panelists have talked about, is trying to find entry points through community activism, through state, through local, through trying to play the game.
Thank you. I think we have time for just one more question.
Although that's a great book by Lisa Heinzeling. So yeah, she's brilliant. Just want to say that.
Hi, I'll stand up. My name is Erin. I'm a Georgetown alum, and I'm currently a fellow at the Environmental Defense Fund. And my question, you talked some about, you know, the big greens and sort of the dynamics between different organizations in the environmental sphere and the environmental justice movement. And I spent a summer in law school working at an organization in Florida where I met Adrienne. Hi, Adrienne. And we were able to connect more directly with some of the people that we were, you know, working on behalf of, because we were really in a community. Whereas now, you know, being at EDF in DC, where we're working on big cases, you're a little more removed from the communities that you're trying to help. And so I'm wondering if the panelists could talk about how, you know, the big greens, or really any group that's working on larger scale litigation, can still connect to the communities that they're ultimately trying to help, and make sure that those voices are part of the litigation.
I'll start. Yeah. Since I know her, she gave me a good opening there. Thank you. Our friend who we've been teasing, who Leslie called out when she came in late, Bernice said something that has always stuck with me, that the cavalry isn't coming, right? And that would be the federal government or whoever is supposed to protect us, and we have to protect ourselves. And I think one of the ways that we can work better with, first of all, everybody needs to recognize that. Right? That we have to work together. And then secondly, when it comes to some big greens, and I'm not going to say all, because we have people who get it, we have to recognize, or what people are beginning to recognize, is that we have to work better together, meaning we have to, the big greens in their gathering of people who are considered to be stakeholders, they have to include communities where that may not have always been the case. And I don't mean things from just hiring people who have an understanding or appreciation for environmental injustice or environmental justice or ethics or whatever the case may be, or who look like us. Yeah, it's something as simple as that, right? Or people of color, or whatever the case may be, is that you've got to be inclusive. And I think that knocking down that door is for some organizations a big challenge, right? But I think that that's part of opening your mind to opening your mind to the reality that this isn't something that you can do to anybody else, right? Everybody has a seat at the table and everybody is represented equally. And I think that that's the realization that everybody has to come to, all organizations, particularly some of the big greens. So.
Okay, last word.
Well, at the Sierra Club, one of the things I realized was that when the Trump administration came in, I had never heard a white person at the Sierra Club talk about white supremacy until the Trump administration had come in. And now all of a sudden, because now everybody's hair's on fire, but some of our hair's been on fire for a really, really long time before the Trump administration. And so I think, maybe it's human nature, things had to get so bad, but I think that this is a great moment. There is an opportunity, but we have to, this makes, EJ it's great, but it's also complicated and it's messy and it takes more work. If you want to go through the shortcut route and skip this part, I don't think the organizations are going to make it, because you're not going to get the solutions that are going to last, because those are the solutions that come from the communities on the ground. And when it comes to opportunities, when it comes to renewable energy, those are the communities who not only are going to benefit the most, but they're going to do it like zeal, Reese, and converts, because they have the opportunity. So, and what's weird about the mainstream organizations is that they abhor monocultures in the natural ecosystem, but they don't have a problem with it internally. And I'm not talking about just people being, I'm talking about also we need to have the diversity of thought. And, and consideration of the different communities, especially the faith community. I get on my organization all the time, constantly having meetings on Sundays or Wednesday nights in the South where people are having Bible study, all right? And that sort of thing. You're losing folks when because they really do care. And because it's part of their heritage. And so there's all these efforts going on with the big greens. There's Green 2.0 to diversify. There's lots of efforts happening. And I think that finally people are realizing that if we're really going to win, and winning being, what does winning mean? Winning means bringing everybody in. Then we're going to have to, we are at the Sierra Club, we're working very hard to make sure that not are we inclusive internally or inclusive externally, and that it's going to take moving at the speed of trust. It's going to take what it's going to take. It's going to take as long as it's going to take. So I think that it's exciting, and that brings up new opportunities.
Thank you for ending on a positive note. Thank you to the panelists. Please round of applause. Thank you all for coming out. We invite you to a reception afterwards to continue the conversation. Scott, do you have any last words?
That's it. Come drink.
All right, so that's it. Yeah.